You don't overcome fear. You learn to understand it. And until you do, it will control everything you do. Most people think fear is the problem, something to get rid of, something to fight, something to eliminate. So they try. They push through it, ignore it, suppress it, distract themselves from it, tell themselves it shouldn't be there. But no matter how much they try, fear keeps coming back in different situations, different forms, different moments. Because fear is not the enemy, it's a signal. And when you treat a signal like an enemy, you don't solve it. You silence it temporarily. And what is silenced does not disappear. It waits. It builds. It returns. Stronger, more persistent, more difficult to ignore. And this is where most people get stuck. They think they're making progress because they're pushing through fear. But what they're actually doing is avoiding understanding it. They are acting without awareness, moving forward without clarity. And that creates a pattern. You do something despite fear, but you don't understand why the fear is there. So the next time it appears, it feels just as strong, just as real, just as limiting, because nothing has changed internally, only externally. And external action, without internal understanding, does not create freedom. It creates repetition. You keep facing the same fear, in different situations, with different faces, but the same root, unexamined, ununderstood. And according to Carl Jung, what you resist not only persists, it grows stronger, because resistance does not resolve anything. It creates tension. It pushes the fear deeper into the unconscious, where it becomes harder to see, but more powerful, because now it is influencing you without your awareness. You think you're making decisions, but you're reacting. You think you're choosing, but you're avoiding, because the fear is still there, just hidden, operating from the background, shaping your behavior without you fully realizing it. And that is the real problem. Not fear itself, but unconscious fear. Fear you don't understand. Fear you haven't faced. Fear you've tried to suppress. Because unconscious fear does not stay still. It expresses itself in hesitation, in overthinking, in procrastination, in self-doubt, in staying in situations that no longer align with you, in avoiding opportunities that could change your life. And because you don't trace it back to its source, you think it's just who you are. This is just how I am. I'm just not confident. I'm just not ready. But those are not truths. They are interpretations of something deeper, something you haven't fully seen yet. Because fear is not random. It is connected to your past, to your experiences, to your conditioning, to what you've learned about safety, about risk, about yourself. And until you understand that, you will keep reacting to fear instead of learning from it. Because fear is not there to stop you. It's there to show you something, something unresolved, something unprocessed, something you haven't fully faced. And when you ignore that message, you lose the information, but you keep the feeling. You don't know why you're afraid, but you feel it anyway. And that confusion creates more fear, because now you don't just fear the situation, you fear your own reaction to it. You don't trust yourself. You don't trust your judgment. You don't trust your ability to handle it. And that lack of trust is what keeps you stuck. Not the fear itself, but the way you relate to it. You see it as something to eliminate instead of something to understand. And that perspective changes everything. Because when you stop trying to eliminate fear, you create space. Space to observe it, to question it, to understand it, without immediately reacting to it, without trying to escape it. And that is where the shift begins. Not in action, but in awareness. You feel the fear, and instead of pushing it away, you stay. You notice it, where it shows up in your body, what thoughts come with it, what it is connected to. And that observation changes your relationship with it. Because now, you are not inside the fear. You are aware of it. And awareness creates distance. Not distance to avoid it, but distance to understand it. And from that place, you begin to see something clearly. Fear is not always about the present. It is often about the past. Old experiences, old beliefs, old patterns, still active. still influencing you, even when the situation is different. And that realization changes how you respond, because now you are not just reacting to what is in front of you, you are understanding what is behind it. And that is where real change begins, not by removing fear, but by bringing it into awareness, understanding it, working with it, instead of fighting against it. Because once you understand fear, it no longer controls you, not because it disappears, but because you see it clearly. And what you see clearly, you are no longer controlled by, in the same way. And that is where real freedom begins, not in the absence of fear, but in understanding it. When you stop trying to eliminate fear, you begin to see it differently, not as something to escape, but as something to listen to. And that shift changes how you experience it, because now you are not immediately reacting. You are observing. You feel the fear rise, but instead of pushing it away, you pause. You stay with it. You let it exist, without trying to fix it. And in that moment, something becomes clear. Fear is not just a feeling. It carries information, specific, personal, meaningful information about you, about what you value, about what you avoid, about what you believe. And when you start paying attention, you begin to notice patterns. The same fear, showing up in different situations, in different forms, but connected. At the root, you hesitate to speak, not because of the moment, but because of what it might mean. Rejection, judgment, embarrassment. You avoid taking a step forward, not because you can't, but because of what could happen. Failure, uncertainty, loss of control. And when you trace it back, you begin to see something deeper. Fear is not just about the future. It is shaped by the past, by experiences where something felt unsafe, unpredictable, overwhelming. And your mind learned from that. It created a pattern, a way to protect you, a way to avoid feeling that again. And that pattern becomes automatic. It activates before you even think, before you even decide, because it is not conscious. It is learned, conditioned, and reinforced over time. And this is why pushing through fear doesn't fully resolve it, because the pattern is still there. The response is still active. Even if you override it in the moment, it will return in another situation, another form, because it hasn't been understood. It hasn't been integrated. And this is what Carl Jung pointed toward, not the elimination of fear, but the integration of it, understanding where it comes from, what it is connected to, why it shows up, instead of just reacting to it. Because when you understand something, you reduce its power, not by force, but by clarity. You see it for what it is, a response, not a command, a signal, not a rule. And that distinction changes how you respond, because now, fear is no longer something that decides for you. It is something you consider, something you evaluate, something you can question. And that questioning opens a deeper layer. You begin to ask, is this fear about the present? Or is it coming from something older, something learned, something carried forward, without being re-examined? And often, you begin to see that the intensity of the fear does not match the reality of the situation. It feels bigger, heavier, more overwhelming than what is actually happening. And that tells you something, that the fear is not just about now. It is connected to then, to something unresolved, something that hasn't been fully processed. And when you see that, you stop treating every fear as immediate danger. You begin to separate what is real from what is remembered, what is happening now from what once happened before. And that separation creates space, space to respond differently, not automatically, not reactively, but consciously. You still feel the fear, but you are not consumed by it. You are aware of it, and awareness changes your relationship with it, because now you are not inside the fear. You are observing it, understanding it, working with it, and that creates something essential: self-trust, the ability to experience fear without losing control, without immediately escaping, without assuming it defines reality. Because you understand it, you know where it comes from, you know what it represents, And that understanding makes it manageable. Not easy, but manageable. And that is the difference between being controlled by fear and being aware of it. One limits you, the other informs you. One keeps you stuck, the other helps you grow. And growth always involves discomfort, always involves uncertainty, always involves stepping into something unknown. And fear will be there, not as a barrier, but as part of the process, a signal that you are moving beyond what is familiar, beyond what is known, beyond what feels safe. And when you understand that, you stop waiting for fear to disappear. Before you act, you stop seeing fear as a sign to stop and start seeing it as something to understand, something to learn from, something to carry, without letting it decide your direction. And that is where something shifts. You begin to move differently, not without fear, but with awareness, with clarity, with intention, because now you are not trying to eliminate fear. You are integrating it. And integration is what creates stability, not the absence of fear, but the ability to hold it, to understand it, to move forward without being controlled by it. And that is what allows you to actually live instead of constantly avoiding what you feel. The deeper you understand fear, the more you realize it is not trying to stop you. It is trying to protect you. But protection is not always accurate because it is based on the past, not the present. And this is where the confusion begins. Your mind reacts as if something dangerous is happening, even when it isn't, because it remembers, not consciously, but emotionally. It remembers what felt overwhelming, what felt unsafe, what felt like too much to handle. And it tries to prevent that from happening again. But it does that without checking if the situation is the same, without updating the response. So you end up reacting to something that is no longer there, with the same intensity, the same urgency, the same fear. And that creates distortion. You see things as more threatening, more risky, more dangerous than they actually are. Not because you are weak, but because your perception is influenced by memory, not just reality. And this is why fear can feel so convincing, so real, so immediate, because it is not just a thought. It is a full-body response. It pulls your attention. It speeds up your thinking. It narrows your focus to what feels like danger. And in that state, clarity disappears. Perspective disappears. You are not seeing the situation. You are experiencing the reaction. And most people stop there. They feel the fear and assume it is truth. They don't question it. They don't examine it. They don't step back from it. They accept it as reality. And that is where control is lost. Because now, fear is not just influencing you. It is defining your choices, your actions, your direction. And over time, that creates limitation. Not because you lack ability, but because you are constantly responding to something that feels real, but is not always accurate. And this is where deeper awareness becomes necessary, because understanding fear is not just about observing it. It is about questioning it, challenging it, looking at it closely, without immediately believing it. You feel the fear, and instead of reacting, you ask, what is this actually about? What am I afraid of right now? And where does this come from? And those questions create distance, not distance to avoid, but distance to see clearly. Because when you question fear, you begin to separate the feeling from the meaning you attach to it. You realize that the feeling is real, but the interpretation may not be. And that realization changes everything, because now you are not automatically accepting fear as truth. You are evaluating it, understanding it, working with it. And this is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke about making the unconscious conscious, bringing into awareness what has been operating in the background without being questioned, without being understood. Because once something becomes conscious, it loses some of its power, not completely, but enough to create space for a different response. And that response is what creates change, not forcing yourself to act, not suppressing what you feel, but choosing how to respond, based on awareness, not automatic reaction. And that is where most people struggle, because choosing consciously requires staying present in discomfort, without escaping it, without numbing it, without rushing to remove it. And that is difficult, because everything in you wants to return to safety, to familiarity, to what feels certain, even if it keeps you limited, even if it keeps you in the same patterns, because familiarity feels safer than possibility. But possibility is where growth exists, and growth always involves uncertainty, always involves stepping beyond what you know, and fear will always be there, at that edge, not as something to eliminate, but as something to understand. Because at the edge of your comfort, fear is natural, expected, unavoidable. And when you understand that, you stop trying to remove it. You stop waiting for it to go away before you act. And instead, you learn to move with it, to carry it, without letting it define your direction. And that creates something powerful, not the absence of fear, but resilience, the ability to experience discomfort without collapsing, without retreating, without giving up control to the feeling. And resilience is built through experience, through staying present, through choosing to move forward, even when fear is present, but with awareness, not blindly, not reactively, but consciously. And over time, that changes your relationship with fear. You no longer see it as something that stops you. You see it as something that signals growth, a sign that you are stepping into something new, something unfamiliar, something that requires expansion. And that perspective transforms the experience, because now, fear is not a wall. It is a doorway, not something that blocks you, but something that shows you where you can grow, where you can expand, where you can become more. And that shift is what allows you to live differently, not without fear, but without being controlled by it. Because you understand it, you see it clearly, you work with it instead of against it. And that is where real freedom begins, not in removing fear, but in no longer being defined by it. Understanding fear is only the beginning, because awareness without action changes nothing. You can see your patterns, understand your reactions, recognize where your fear comes from, and still stay exactly where you are. Because insight alone does not move your life forward. It creates clarity, but clarity must be used, applied, lived. And this is where the real shift happens, not in understanding fear, but in how you respond to it after you understand it. Because now you have a choice, not a reaction, not an automatic response. A choice. You feel the fear. You recognize it. You understand what it is connected to. And instead of immediately pulling back, you pause. And in that pause, everything is different, because now you are not acting from the past. You are responding in the present. You are not being controlled by the pattern. You are aware of it. And awareness gives you space to choose a different direction, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels uncertain, even if it feels unfamiliar. And that choice is where change begins. Not a big dramatic shift, but small decisions, repeated consistently. You feel fear, and instead of avoiding the situation, you stay. You take a step forward, not recklessly, not blindly, but consciously, with awareness, with understanding. And that step builds something, not confidence immediately, but evidence. Evidence that you can act, even when fear is present. Evidence that you can handle discomfort without collapsing, without retreating. And that evidence becomes the foundation of real confidence, because confidence is not built by eliminating fear. It is built by experiencing it and realizing you are still capable, you are still in control, you are still able to move forward. And the more you do that, the more something shifts internally. You stop seeing fear as something that defines your limits and start seeing it as something that accompanies growth, a natural response to stepping into something new, something unknown, something that requires expansion. And that shift changes how you approach your life. You stop waiting, waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel certain, waiting for fear to disappear. Because you understand something now. That moment will never fully come. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be risk. There will always be something unknown. And fear will always exist at that edge. But that edge is where your life expands, where new experiences happen, where growth takes place. And if you avoid that edge, you avoid growth. You stay where it is familiar, where it is predictable, where it is safe, but also where it is limited. And over time, that limitation becomes clear. Not always immediately, but gradually. You begin to feel it. That sense of being stuck. That sense of something missing. That sense that you are capable of more, but not fully stepping into it. Because fear has been deciding for you, without you realizing it. But now, with awareness, with understanding, that changes. Because now, you see fear clearly, not as truth, not as command, but as information. And when you see it that way, you are no longer controlled by it. In the same way, you can feel it without obeying it. You can experience it without retreating. You can carry it without letting it decide your direction. And that creates something deeper: self-trust, the ability to rely on yourself. Not because you feel no fear, but because you know you can handle it. You can move through it. You can act despite it. And that trust is what allows you to live freely, not free from fear, but free from being controlled by it. And that is the distinction most people misunderstand. Freedom is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act without being defined by it. And that ability is built through repeated experience, through choosing again and again to move forward with awareness, with understanding, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels uncertain. And over time, that becomes your default, not avoidance, not hesitation, but engagement. You feel fear, you understand it, and you move anyway, not recklessly, but consciously. And that is what Carl Jung was pointing toward: not a life without fear, but a life where fear is no longer in control, where you are aware of what drives you, where you understand what influences you, where you are not reacting blindly, but choosing intentionally. And that is where everything changes, not externally, but internally, because now you are not waiting for the world to feel safe. You are building the capacity to move through it as it is, uncertain, unpredictable, imperfect. And that capacity is what allows you to live fully, not by removing fear, but by understanding it and no longer letting it decide your life. If you're still trying to get rid of fear, you're fighting the wrong battle. Because according to Carl Jung, what you resist will keep returning. So here's the shift. Stop asking, how do I eliminate fear? And start asking, what is this fear trying to show me? Because the moment you understand it, it stops controlling you the same way. So next time fear shows up, don't run, don't distract, don't suppress it. Pause, look at it, question it. Because that moment, that small moment of awareness, is where your life starts to change. If you're ready to stop being controlled by fear and start understanding yourself on a deeper level, subscribe. Because this isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming someone who is no longer ruled by it.